Hey, Read Through the Word. Today is August 23rd, and today's lesson is called Oh, Egypt. This is a little nerdy. Big shock, right? Okay. We're in Ezekiel 31:18. It says this: O Egypt, to which of the trees of Eden will you compare your strength and glory? You too will be brought down to the depths with all these other nations. You will lie there among the outcasts who have died by the sword. This will be the fate of Pharaoh and all his hordes. I, the sovereign Lord, have spoken. Y'all know I'm a history person. And that it is, and we discuss this a lot of times if I ever teach in Exodus, the plagues, but of God's hand at work throughout history and how he has left evidence throughout history in the world that ancient civilizations used to be really big powers and now they're nothing. But we have evidence of them because of archaeology. So we have, if you look at the Bible and the ancient civilizations it records, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Greece, Rome, even the high point of the Jewish nation, there's archaeological evidence of all of those. That's not a mistake, because of this idea of we are so powerful, nothing can bring us down. As a student of history, now ancient civilizations existed for long periods, but they were not, they had small times where they were at the height of their power. And there might have, just like when you look at the ancient Rome, you can look at Rome, the rise of Rome, as like the fall of Greece, and all the way to like the beginning of, the Byzantine Empire is considered still Rome. It had just been split into Eastern and Western empires and then named the Byzantine. And they consider that the fall of that is what leads us into what is known as the Dark Ages, that they don't really call the Dark Ages anymore. But you'll see all that. But then at the height of their power, you're looking only at a couple of 100 years. No big empire or large civilization goes more than 200 to 300 years in power. Rome's was called the Pax Romana. There was like that 200-year period where everything was good. And then before that, we were fighting for everything. And after that, we were fighting for everything else. And so you see that in civilizations. The height of Egypt is when we see the pyramids and everything. What we think of the height of Egypt, like with Cleopatra and everything, Cleopatra was a Greek. And so they were under someone else. So I think it's very interesting right here in Ezekiel, where God talks to all of these ancient civilizations and tells them of their coming downfall that we now have record of by just like using Google Earth and zooming in on places. But God had used the Egyptian empire in the past to show his power. That was the whole point of the plagues. And to look at their ancient beliefs of their gods. And, go back to when we looked at those, because I usually go through each of the plagues and each of the gods. But God is telling Egypt that the days of power will be done. So right here at the end, Egypt is really right before this, during the Assyrian Empire, Egypt was like a under the thumb of Assyria, and you're going to see then like the Persians and then the Greeks take over. So Egypt will never be like truly Egyptian, what we know as Egyptian again. It is watching what used to be such the power, the Pharaoh, the pyramids. How did it, look at Egypt today in the world stage. We have ancient ruins, but what is God doing? So what we look at is, how did Egypt get from that to today? And it is because I want to prove a point to you. I want to show you this. The first sign of the weakening was the loss of military power. And we discussed this one time about how there was no, when Israel had no weapons because all their metal had been taken. Or when we looked at David and Goliath. But what happens with Egypt is all these other civilizations like Assyria started rising. They had basically natural resources that allowed them to make weapons. Egypt had a river. And they didn't have the resources to have the weapons that everyone else did. And so it leads to a loss in military power. And then they had, if you know anything about Upper Egypt, which is actually what we would know Southern Egypt, is actually upper. Lower Egypt is Northern Egypt toward the Mediterranean at the delta of the Nile. When you have that, you have there's a struggle for power. There's civil war during that time. And so which made them divided and open for invasion. It was like, come on in, Assyria, we're easy taken. We have so much fighting within our own borders. We're not even watching for somebody to come take us. And then the economic disparity, because they are dependent on water from the Nile in those times, is they were dependent on it to flood and to have a dry season. Well, they started having more dry than they did flood, which leads to farmers are poor, the rich kept getting richer, the poor kept getting poorer. And so there's an economic disparity, which leads to unrest. And all this led to this praying to the Nile, and the Nile's not, I don't think this God system we have set up in Egypt is working for us. And so it becomes under the thumb a province of Assyria, and then Persia, and then Greece. And we'll talk about that when we look at the intertestamental period, and all, Mark Antony and Cleopatra and all of that. That Christianity is what brings the final end to what we know of as ancient Egypt, looking forward. Because it brings in Christianity. That's in the intertestamental period, when you look at how we get the rise of the Greek language, the rise of the Greek alphabet leads to not using hieroglyphics anymore, which gives a culture, language is a defining thing with culture, and they didn't have that to unite them anymore. So then now we have a Greek thing, which was Alexander the Great. That was his point, to use his language and his alphabet. But the rise of thinking in the Library at Alexandria and the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that happens. And so Christianity becomes, as we go into the New Testament, and after, when we see the rise of the church in Africa, you see from after the first evangelist Philip, and you see him convert what we know as the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts. You see that happen. And so you see the thing that used to unite a culture is changed. Now, we could be like the modern mind and go, well, how dare they do such? But how about we look at, this is the plan of God. that God used the Egyptian empire for his purposes. And when it was no longer necessary, because he's got a story to tell. And we all have a part in it. Even civilizations and cultures have a part in God telling his story. That's the whole point. That's why I keep showing y'all Acts 17. Go and how God uses time and space to tell his story. Because when God decides a civilization's time is done, it's done. I mean, that's what happened with Egypt, and then what we see with the destruction of the temple with Rome, and how Rome destroys the temple in 70 AD, and we lost. I mean, God has plans. Can we look big and see God has plans? His plans are for our good and for his glory, and he uses time and space to tell his story. And when a place and a time, when that chapter's done, God moves on. And so Ezekiel is telling all of these nations about when their chapter will be done. Because God has a plan, and his plan will be accomplished. We'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.